And now we're in for a temper. Put these in the oven for the night. And then I'm looking forward to Rockwell testing them and seeing how the new Parks 50 did. See if we get a little bit better hardness after this same degree of temper.
So I got them out of the oven, and what I did immediately was surface grind them just to get the decarb off, and then I went straight to grinding flat bevels onto them with 36 grit ceramic belts here. There's no sense checking the hardness on a blade after quenching it until you've at least got the decarb off. And in this case, I just kind of got carried away and did a fair amount of work before we did the next talking section of the video. You'll notice that in this final installment, when it got to the rest of the knife making, I skipped this and that on camera, but I will try to at least touch on it in commentary when that appears to be the case. At any rate, I'm not going to make you watch me grind this whole bevel. This is just a representative little slice here, and then we'll move on.
Here we are with a flat grind down to 5/1000ths thickness at the edge, and just the edge polished out to 400 grit gator belt, and the faces here. But everything that's going to be compound grind later, you can see it's still got even some 36 grit scratches near the spine because I'm just going to be grinding it more. But everything that I'm going to want to hand sand later and not be hitting with the compound grind right now is getting 400 grit. And I've just kind of melted the edges on everything a little bit already. So compound grinding now.
Got started on the compound grinding and realized I'd forgotten to Rockwell test them yet, so we're gonna go ahead and do that now real quick before we jump back on the grinder. Right now I'm testing my test block. This is the 62.1 Rockwell test block, just to make sure that the tester is reading accurately today. I try to always do this before testing, just so we'll know. It's always a good idea to do more than one test, especially because the first test or two can often be an outlier. You may get an odd reading from them, and if you do, it's just because the machine needs some pressure on all of the workings to kind of evacuate oil off of the screw base for the anvil and stuff like that, so your second and third readings will often be better. We'll watch this reading here in actual time, bringing it up to 0, setting the preload there, adjusting the trim ring to 0, and then I loosen the catch. It applies the secondary load here, and we'll wait for the needle to settle. When it does, we're going to latch it back so we actually get our reading, and boom, 62 on the money, both tests. So I'm satisfied with that. So I'm now compound grinding to finish the bevels of the knife. I'll talk a little bit about that here, but I actually do cover this in more detail in some videos that I put out in the past. So if you want a more detailed look at that, go back and check that out. I'll try to remember to post the link for that at the end of the video. But basically, I have got a radius platen on right now, 30-degree radius, and well, arc section of a 30-inch circle. So 30-inch hollow grind is basically what I'm approximating. And I'm just doing that symmetrically, doing each side of the knife here. You can see there, it's developing a concavity down the middle of the blade. I've got a line marked on the blade where I don't want to grind past down to create a shoulder. That tends to help food fall off the blade when it rides up past the shoulder when you're cutting. Also, it lightens the blade. I like a light chef knife. Not everyone does, but I do. And it also reduces drag a little bit when you're slicing. So all around, it's kind of a little performance upgrade for your all-around chef knife.
Here we are with compound grinds installed. Hollow ground with 36, 120 gator, and then 400 Gator A45. A little rough yet. We'll be hand sanding it though, and we got any bad scratches out. So this blade is now finish ground, to my standards anyway. It wouldn't be for a belt finish knife, but this is finish ground for me for what's going to be hand sanded and etched. Next, I'll be focusing on some handle stuff and bolster shape and things like that, and I'll leave the blade where it is until the handle is caught up, and then I'll sand the blade at that point.
I love this machine that I'm using right now. Partly that's because I got it most recently, but it's also just super cool. This is an old 1930s Gebruder Thiel number 3 die filer. You can see how it works. It's holding a little file there in the business end of it, and it's just working that up and down in a linear fashion. I have a strap of aluminum with a little V on it, like a bench pin, grabbed to the table. It sits me up off the table a little bit to create a space for the integral bolster to have clearance to sit on the table. What I'm doing right now is I've rough bandsawed out a rectangular notch in the end of the Tang after annealing the Tang with a torch, and I'm now using a little file in the die filer to clean the edges of that cut back to just the size and shape I need to press fit my threaded Tang extension into it cold. This machine does not have the hold down arms that are supposed to go with them. Somehow between the 1930s and now, they fell by the wayside. So one thing that I have to do is fabricate new hold down arms to mount on this machine. If you don't have them, you have to be very careful to hold the stock that you're working on down very firmly, because if you don't, it will pinch the living heck out of your fingers. As you can see, I have just lit the oxyacetylene torch. I'm going to adjust it back to a mostly neutral flame with about a 2x acetylene feather, 2x or 3x. And in the center of the picture here is the Tang of the knife pointing up out of a vise. I've got it press fit with a bolt for a threaded Tang extension. I've got some brazing rod here. It's flux coated, but I'm dipping it in a little extra flux. I find that works a little better. And what you have to do is kind of back off of what you're heating and use the more bushy part of the flame to heat it evenly all together from all sides. You don't want to bring it up to heat, dramatically more in any one more place than another. And I got to make sure to get kind of down below the end of the slot a little bit so that when I do wet bronze into it, it flows all the way down into the bottom of the slot, i.e. the end of the bolt, wets everything and penetrates the joint fully, so I don't have any incomplete spots hiding anywhere in that braze joint. It needs to be as strong as possible. I like to braze this instead of weld it because you don't get your grain of your steel blown up quite as much if it never reaches fully liquid like it would in the welding process. This isn't quite as hot as it looks on camera. It's just that the flux is creating a sodium flare that kind of gives a white flame, but really the steel is that kind of a yellow heat. Making sure to wear my shade 5 green brazing glasses. I need to add braze from both sides, play the heat around, and watch the bronze suck into the joint fully, wet everything. And while the joint is still fairly warm, I'm going to take a little scrap of bandsaw blade with a tooth still on it and scrape some of that as of yet still soft flux off, just to make it a little easier to clean this up afterward. And then as soon as this cools down, I'm going to reheat it one time to normalize it carefully with the torch, and then I'm going to give it another 2 subcritical anneals with the torch so we don't have any spots of large grain or any hard spots in this Tang, and then it'll be on to the next step.
Tang all brazed up. Nice and full of bronze there. Nice strong joint, annealed. Press fit, brazed, and annealed. And now we have an extension with threads that's just a little bit over the amount of length that we will ultimately need. And we have just traced the handle here and modeled this handle onto the drawing. See, the tang is traced there. We cut a little bit of the tang length off. Now we've got a handle pattern that we can cut off of the cardboard with a good generous grip length. A little bit of style to it. And next we'll be working on the handle frame and scales.
Okay, I love this machine as well. This is another obsolete German manual machine tool. Well, obsolete in production shops. Not for a prototype shop or a knife maker necessarily. This is the Deckel GK21 Pantograph. And here I'm going to be using it with a pattern that I made that's going to give me some squiggle-shaped inlays on the spine side of the handle frame. So I'm going to show you kind of how that process goes as I'm doing it here on the Deckel. Here I'm just getting things kind of situated, lined up. We'll turn the spindle on. We'll get the vacuum going. I find it handy to vacuum while I'm going just so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better, clear the chips as I go. And also, in theory, that helps keep your cutter a little sharper longer, not cutting a bunch of chips as you go. And then I've got my earbuds in to protect my hearing, and of course I'm probably listening to a book or a podcast or something. I forget what it was at this point. Anyway, here we go. I'm tracing the pattern with my right hand. The pattern is twice the size that the cut workpiece ends up being. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. And I'm just kind of mowing around the outside of the inlay material that is super glued down to a blank G10 backing plate that is then clamped with step and strap style clamps to the work table of the pantograph there. One thing that we don't want to do is take a full depth of cut here, because that would be too much cutter pressure on the work, and it could possibly shear the rather delicate bond that the super glue has on the backing of the material, or it could shear some of the material from its own backing. It's a laminated structure, and I've seen that it's not particularly strong. It's better if you inlay it deep into material with epoxy. So we're just taking little passes of like 10 thou depth, adjust the table up, take another 10 thou, and just kind of zen out or listen to something while you do it.
I'm using this stuff called Dichrolam, Dragon Burl, or Fire Burl, similar stuff, Dichrolam. I have it glued to a thin G10 backer and then just super glue tacked down to this heavier G10 milling plate. And I'm just using a 3/16 carbide cutter to do the inlays, and then I'll use a smaller cutter to do the inlay pockets. Here's the pantograph. Here's a pattern set, 2-to-1 reduction. Cut this first. Cut this next, a little bit undersized, tri-fit, and then cut true to size. And that little buddy should just slip right in there. I'm not going to drop it because it'll be tough to get back out right now, but that is ready for glue. Now I'm going to do another one of these right back here, and that'll be that.
We'll watch this from this angle and talk about it for a minute here. Again, I'm not going to make you sit through all of it. This stuff takes forever. You have to be patient. What we have here is a high-speed steel cutter, 3/16 shank. Boy, what is the end size on that? It's a 3/32 end size on that. You got to pick something obviously that's smaller than the actual features of your inlay to get all the inside corners you need. You might want something quite a bit smaller. In this case, it doesn't have any sharp inside corners, so we're able to go with a larger radius cutter, which is good. The delicate little cutters have a shorter life, and it's real easy to break them and dull them. At any rate, we're doing the same thing here. We're taking passes of like 10 thou depth so we don't get a lot of deflection from our cutter. We get a truer cut that way. We're not so hard on the teeth. And I'm making sure to vacuum out that G10 swarf while we're going, because G10 is not good for any cutter, and we're using high-speed steel here, so it dulls faster than even a little carbide would. I've already done one on the front edge. I'm doing number 2 right here, and so I'm almost done, and I need to cut this pretty deep. I don't want any chance of sanding or grinding down through an inlay or into the actual inlay, well, into the bright, colorful material underneath the acrylic top. You can see that I'm working in a machinist / drill press vise here that I have just clamped down to the table. I do have it trammed in, so it is in relation true to the pattern that I'm tracing. And we just take it a bit at a time. It's hard to get both hands in a frame of the camera with a close enough zoom to actually see any detail of what's going on. So here's the right hand on the pattern table. I have a stylus here that is twice the diameter of the actual cutter. So 3/16 stylus, 3/32 cutter for that 2-to-1 ratio. So that's something that you always have to keep in mind. If you're in 4-to-1, your stylus has to be 4 times the diameter of your cutter. This pattern is, of course, then twice the length and width of the pocket that we're cutting. And I have made the pattern out of polycarbonate sheet. It's pretty easy to cut patterns out of, and it's actually pretty tough. It doesn't crack sometimes with you drilling holes through it like acrylic can. And we're just taking it slow and easy here, making sure to keep a little pressure on the wall of it as we're moving along it so we don't wander in our cut. And we're just wrapping this up, so here in a second we'll see how we did.
Okay, inlays are glued in. They're a little bit proud of the surface because I didn't cut the pockets quite as deep as the inlays are tall. Give me some room to kind of cut down to a very nice interface when the surfaces meet. There's plenty of clear resin on top of this stuff, so I got room to grind into it. 180 thou deep recesses, and the material itself is 200 thou, so I'm proud by 10 thou, or gosh, 20, duh. So that's chilling there. It's been epoxied, and then so I would have some work to do. I went ahead and scribed these to the frame first, so now I'm going to be cutting and shaping a little bit of carbon fiber while that's getting an initial cure, and then I can be drilling through it for the hidden pins and stuff like that. Doing some more handle work. We're over here at the lathe making a stainless tang nut. Already drilled it out. Now we're just tapping it, and then we'll cut it off and we'll be able to clamp the handle together from then on. Coming right along. I got the bolster shaped, mostly finished ground, needs just a little bit more 600 grit just to prep it for hand sanding. Everything chamfered all the way around here, spine, heel, they're comfortable. The inlays are done in ground flush. I got my little proud fit established all the way around the bolster there, bolster fit up. And now I'm just shaping the back end of the handle, putting a hollow in there next. Got the tang nut all done. This is all clamped up, so just some handle sculpting and finishing, and then we'll be sanding and etching the blade.
Here I'm using the 4-inch contact wheel to go ahead and hollow out the back portion of the handle. This is not strictly necessary on a chef knife. It's kind of a holdover that a lot of people use from fighting knife handles or other fixed blades than chef knives, hunting knives and stuff. It's always popular to have what's called a palm swell in there, so it fits into the palm of your hand with a protrusion in the middle. Feels nice. But really, when you're holding a knife in a hammer grip, that feels best, and you almost never hold a chef knife that way. However, it does lighten the back end of the handle to improve balance, lighten the weight, and it also provides a nice, just kind of a visual embellishment to show that you can contour well. that you can sculpt symmetrically and with pleasing lines. And if you have laminate material like a carbon fiber or a layer G10 to work down through, we can expose some of the laminations, making the handle look cooler too. I took video of the entire shaping process for the hollows on the back of this, but it was super long, so I sped it up ×8. But we can watch it at that speed. You can see I am alternating which end I'm looking at it from as I'm grinding. That allows me to accurately grind up to both ends of the lines, to both ends of the concave that I want, without blowing past where that crisp shoulder will be established mid-handle into the kind of tapered ramp on the front of the handle. So I'm looking at it from the top, flipping it over, looking at it from the bottom as I'm hollowing right up to the end of the handle, and I'm endeavoring to have a smooth concavity in between without any lumps and bumps.
Thing's coming along nicely. The handle sculpting is almost finished. The inlays are popping. Carbon fiber's looking nice. Got a few little scratches left to get out of it. Tang nut's done. Fits good at the bolster. So now it's just sand the blade up and etch it.
Well, it's time to pay the piper. Here we are, having fabricated the handle, gotten everything fit up. I like to do all that before I pull a finish on the blade. That way I don't have to worry about dinging the blade, dinging a nicely sanded blade while I'm, have it around all the machines over in the other room, cutting handle pieces, fitting them and stuff. So here I am finally sanding the blade. I'm using Rhino Wet Redline paper from Indasa. I'm just sanding it dry. I've used all kind of stuff for lubricant for it, but dry is kind of like my jam most of these days. It's less messy for one thing, and it still cuts pretty aggressively. I'm using a curved backer to get into the compound grind there. Your backer doesn't have to be the exact same radius as the grind. It's actually a little better if it's a little bit smaller of a radius than the grind. That way you can kind of control where in the grind you're sanding. And here I'm using a curved steel backer. I just, freehand bent it cold with a rounding hammer and then bonded some leather to the face of it. Hard leather, and that way it gives me a little bit of cushion on the sanding, a little bit of blending. And I'm just going to take it up to 400 grit on each side and then flat sand the flat parts of it up to 400 grit, sand the bolster out, and then it'll be on to the next thing. You can see I'm just holding the paper on there. I cut it into 1-inch wide strips with just a basic paper cutting table. And that way, strips wider than 1 inch don't cut as aggressively because you got a bigger contact point and then less pressure per square inch. Unfortunately, I did not capture the etch process in this video, but I do it elsewhere, notably in the Mosaic Bolo series.
Been slaving away on this all day. Just trying to get it ready for an etch in the morning. I got to sand it out to 400 grit, and then I got a logo etched, and then I got the etch masked. That's going to dry. In the morning, we'll just go ahead and do just a tiny little bit more sanding on this. Get the bottom of the bolster, the top of the bolster, and the spine. Just pull a few more lines, and then we will throw that in the ferric. But I am done for the night. Handle's all ready to glue on. Carbon fiber, hand sanded through 400, 1000, 2000 grits, and buffed with pink scratchless. Carbon fiber responds really well to a nice polish. So does that dichro lamb. It's giving it that spicy color accent there. Counterbore is all good, end of handle is good. And so we're going to pull that blade out of the coffee and slap some epoxy in there and screw it all together. Finally got this one all wrapped up. Steel came out good. Got some good pattern flow in there. Good links. Trademark came out good. Compound grind. 2 7/16 tall at the heel and 10 5/8 long cutting edge. Nicely sculpted carbon fiber over a G10 frame with that fire burl dichro lamb inlay on the spine of the handle. Through Tang construction with a stainless nut there. Everything buffed to a nice finish, all corners rounded off and comfy. And that's another one for the books.